Hey there, travelers. Before we dive into today's story, drop a comment below telling us where you're tuning in from. Now let's begin our journey into the unknown. I'm writing this in my attic on a Tuesday afternoon in November 1995. I'm 95 years old, and my hands shake so badly I can barely hold the pen. But I need to write this down before I go, before the truth dies with me. They told us we saved the world in 1945. They gave us medals, parades, handshakes from generals who looked us in the eye and thanked us for our service. But they never told anyone what we actually saved them from. They never could. Because if people knew the truth about what happened in those mountains near the German border, if they understood what we found there and what it took to stop it, they'd never sleep soundly again. I know I haven't. Not in 50 years. My name is Robert Ladd, and I led the most classified mission of World War II. This is what really happened. It was January 1945, and we were cold. Not the kind of cold you feel waiting for a bus on a winter morning. This was the kind that got into your bones and made a home there, that turned your breath to ice crystals before it left your lips. The Ardennes forest stretched around us in every direction, snow piled 3 feet deep in places, and the trees stood bare and skeletal against a sky the color of old steel. There were 8 of us in the patrol unit: Lieutenant Clark Crowley, Sergeant Eddie Kern, Corporal Frank Fraser, Private Evan Duke, and 4 others whose names I'll get to. We'd been trudging through these mountains for 3 days, following up on reports of enemy movement near the border villages. Intel said the Germans were retreating, desperate and scattered. What we found was something else entirely. Eddie walked beside me, his rifle slung over his shoulder, breath coming out in white puffs. We'd grown up 2 towns apart in Ohio, joined up together in '42. He had this way of humming when he was nervous, old hymns his grandmother taught him. He was humming that morning. "You feel it too?" I asked him. He stopped humming. "Feel what?" "Like we're being watched." Eddie glanced at the tree line, then back at me. "Bobby, we've been in this forest for 3 days. Everything feels wrong here." He wasn't lying. There was something oppressive about these mountains, something that pressed down on you like a weight on your chest. The silence was too complete. No birds, no animals moving through the underbrush, just wind through dead branches and the crunch of our boots in the snow. Lieutenant Crowley raised his fist, and we stopped. He was 34, old for a combat officer, with gray already streaking through his dark hair. He'd seen action in North Africa and Italy before this. The man didn't rattle easily, but his hand was shaking when he lowered it. "Village ahead," he said quietly. "Weapons ready." We crested a ridge, and there it was. A small German hamlet nestled in the valley below. Maybe 20 buildings, stone cottages with steep roofs designed to shed heavy snow. Smoke should have been rising from chimneys. Lights should have been burning in windows as dusk approached. Instead, there was nothing. No movement, no sound. "Looks abandoned," Frank Fraser muttered. He was from Texas, built like a bull, with a voice that carried even when he whispered. "Maybe they evacuated before the fighting reached them." "Maybe," Crowley said, but he didn't sound convinced. We descended into the village as twilight bled across the sky, turning everything blue and purple. The snow here was disturbed, trampled by many feet, but the tracks were old, partially filled in by recent snowfall. Days old, at least. The first door we tried was hanging off its hinges. Inside, the cottage was wrecked. Furniture overturned, dishes shattered on the floor, a portrait of a family torn from the wall and lying face down in broken glass. But no bodies, no blood. "They left in a hurry," Evan Duke said. He was 19, the youngest among us, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Look at this." He pointed to the table, where a meal sat half-eaten, frozen solid now, but clearly abandoned mid-bite. Eddie crossed himself. Something scared them bad. We checked 3 more houses and found the same thing. Hasty departures, signs of panic, but no indication of what had caused it. No shell damage, no bullet holes, no evidence of fighting. Then we found the church. It sat at the center of the village, a small stone building with a bell tower that stretched toward the darkening sky. The door was closed, and when Frank pushed it open, the hinges screamed in protest. The smell hit us first. Death has a particular odor. Every soldier knows it. Sweet and rotten and chemical all at once, the smell of meat going bad. It filled the church like a presence, and I heard Evan gag behind me. "Jesus Christ," Eddie whispered. The bodies were piled in the center of the nave. Men, women, children, maybe 30 in all, stacked like cordwood. But these people hadn't been shot or shelled. They'd been torn apart. I've seen a lot of death. I'd watched men die in 100 different ways by that point in the war. But this was different. These bodies looked like they'd been shredded, like something with claws had gone through them with savage efficiency. Arms torn from sockets, torsos opened, faces so mangled they were barely recognizable as human. And they were frozen solid, preserved by the mountain cold in grotesque tableau of their final moments. Frank turned and vomited in the corner. I couldn't blame him. Crowley's face was white, but his voice stayed steady. "Everyone out. Now." We stumbled back into the snow, gulping down clean air. The sun was almost gone now, just a thin line of red on the western horizon. Shadows stretched across the village square. "What could do that?" Evan asked. His voice was shaking. "Animals? Wolves?" "No wolf did that," Eddie said flatly. "No animal I've ever heard of." Crowley pulled out his map, studying it in the fading light. "There are 2 more villages within 5 miles. We need to check them before nightfall." "Sir, with all respect, maybe we should radio this in first," I said. "Get some backup before we—" "Radio's dead," Crowley interrupted. He tapped the handset on his belt. "Has been since we entered the valley. No idea why. We keep moving until we find out what happened here." We moved through the village in silence, weapons ready, eyes scanning every shadow. That's when I saw it. Carved into the stone wall of a house, symbols I didn't recognize. Not German, not any language I'd ever seen. Angular, sharp lines that hurt to look at, arranged in patterns that seemed to twist even though they were perfectly still. "Lieutenant," I called. "Over here." Crowley examined the markings, running his gloved fingers over them. "These are old, really old, older than the village." "What do they mean?" Eddie asked. "I don't know, but I've seen similar markings before, in intelligence briefings. The Germans have been interested in this kind of thing. Occult research, summoning rituals. They've been trying to call forth powers." Frank laughed, but it was hollow. "You're saying the Nazis did this? With what? Devil worship?" "I'm saying they've been dabbling in things they shouldn't," Crowley said quietly, "trying to summon infernal forces to turn the tide of the war. And maybe they succeeded." We reached the edge of the village as full darkness fell. That's when we heard it for the first time, a sound that made every hair on my body stand up. Low and resonant, coming from somewhere deep in the earth. Not quite a growl, not quite a moan. Something in between, something that made my teeth ache and my stomach twist. The sound of something massive, shifting in the dark below our feet. "What in God's name?" Eddie breathed. The ground trembled. Just slightly, but enough that we all felt it. Enough that snow slid from nearby rooftops in small avalanches. Then the screaming started. It came from the north, from somewhere in the forest beyond the village. High and piercing and full of terror. Humans screaming. "Move!" Crowley shouted. We ran toward the sound, crashing through snow and underbrush, weapons raised. The screaming continued, getting louder, more desperate. Then it cut off abruptly, replaced by wet, tearing sounds that made my blood freeze. We burst into a clearing and stopped. 2 of our scouts, Moss and Heidecker, had been sent ahead that morning to check the northern approach. We'd been supposed to meet them at the village. We found them, or what was left of them. Moss's body was suspended in a tree, impaled on broken branches, his torso split open like a butchered animal. Heidecker was on the ground below, and I couldn't tell where he ended and the snow began because everything was red. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Heidecker was still moving, still trying to crawl even though half of him was gone. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out except a wet gurgling. Eddie raised his rifle, hands shaking. I'll end it." "Wait," Crowley said. He knelt beside Heidecker and I saw the young man's eyes focus on him. What did this? What attacked you? Heidecker's mouth moved. Blood bubbled on his lips. Finally, in a whisper so quiet I barely heard it. From below. They came. From below. Not human. Not. Then he stopped moving. We stood in that clearing for maybe 10 seconds, though it felt like hours. The forest around us was completely silent. No wind, no movement. Just 8 soldiers standing in the snow beside 2 mutilated corpses, trying to understand what we were looking at. That's when the ground opened up. Not with a crack or a rumble, just opened, like a mouth. Like 5 feet from where we stood, a hole appeared in the earth, snow and soil falling away to reveal darkness beneath. And from that darkness came the smell, rot and sulfur and burning flesh, the stench of damnation itself. Something moved in that hole. I caught a glimpse of exposed muscle, glistening wet and red, veins pulsing black beneath translucent skin. Then I saw the mouth, massive, filled with jagged teeth, dripping dark fluid that steamed when it hit the snow. Then it lunged. The thing that emerged was nightmare, made flesh. It moved on 4 limbs, but they were wrong, bent at angles that shouldn't exist, corded with muscle that looked flayed and raw. Its body was a mass of decay and mutation, swollen in some places with tumorous growths, stripped to bone and sinew in others. The head hung beneath its torso in an impossible position, a grotesque tumor of a skull with eyes that were barely visible, sunken into rotting flesh. But that mouth, God help me. That mouth was enormous, a cavern of teeth that opened impossibly wide, strings of black ichor stretching between its jaws. Frank fired first, his rifle barking 3 times in rapid succession. The bullets punched into the creature's exposed muscle, and it shrieked, a sound that was pain and rage and hunger all at once. But it didn't stop. It kept coming, moving with horrifying speed despite its grotesque form. More holes were opening around us, perfect circles in the earth, and from each one came the same sounds of movement, the same wet breathing, the same stench of hell itself. "Fall back!" Crowley shouted. "Back to the village, now!" We ran. God help me. We ran while those things pulled themselves up from the earth, while their claws scraped against frozen soil, while their breathing filled the forest with the sound of damnation. Behind us, I could hear them moving, their 4 limbs propelling them forward in a gait that was both animal and utterly alien. We made it to the village and took up positions in the stone houses, barricading doors and windows. 8 of us now, huddled in the gathering darkness, listening to things moving outside. Evan was crying silently, tears freezing on his cheeks. Frank's hands shook so badly he could barely hold his rifle. Eddie stared at the wall, humming his grandmother's hymns again. Crowley checked his radio again. Still dead. He looked at each of us in turn, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. "We hold here until dawn," he said. "Then we move to higher ground. There's supposed to be some kind of ruins up the mountain, old stone formations. Maybe we can get better radio reception from there." "And if those things come for us tonight?" I asked. Crowley didn't answer. He didn't have to. We sat in that house as night fell completely, as the temperature dropped below 0, as the moon rose over the mountains and painted everything silver and black. For a while there was only silence. Then, around midnight, they came. The first attack came from below. The floor exploded upward in the center of the room, stone and earth erupting in a fountain of debris. The thing that emerged was massive, its body a writhing mass of exposed organs and pulsing veins, black fluid dripping from every surface. Its mouth gaped open, revealing rows of teeth that looked like broken glass, and it released a sound that made my ears ring. Frank screamed and opened fire. Bullets tore into the creature's flesh, black ichor spraying across the room. But it kept coming, dragging itself forward with limbs that bent and twisted, leaving trails of corruption on the floor. More emerged behind it, pulling themselves up from the tunnel below. They moved with horrible coordination, like they shared a single mind, their bodies contorting to fit through spaces that should have been too small. We fought in chaos and darkness, muzzle flashes illuminating glimpses of nightmare. I emptied my rifle into something that had its head twisted backward on its neck, saw it fall back into the hole. Eddie was beside me, firing in controlled bursts, his face set in a mask of concentration. Then the floor collapsed entirely. We fell through into darkness, into tunnels that shouldn't exist. I hit hard, felt something crack in my ribs, rolled to avoid the debris falling around me. My flashlight was still attached to my belt, and when I clicked it on, I wished I hadn't. The tunnels stretched in every direction, carved through earth and stone in patterns that made no sense. The walls were smooth, almost polished, marked with those same angular symbols we'd seen in the village. And they were moving with creatures, dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. Crawling over each other in a writhing mass of decaying flesh and exposed muscle. Some were fresh, their bodies still glistening with fluids. Others looked older, their flesh dried and cracked but still moving, still hunting. They moved as one, a tide of damnation flowing through the tunnels toward us. "Up!" Crowley's voice cut through my paralysis. "Everyone up! We climb!" We scrambled up the rubble, pulling ourselves back to ground level as the creatures swarmed below. Evan helped me up, his grip iron-strong despite his slight frame. We emerged into the ruined house and kept running, out into the village square, toward the church. Behind us, the ground was collapsing in sections, holes opening everywhere, the entire village sinking as the tunnel network beneath it gave way. The creatures poured out, a tide of rotting flesh and gnashing teeth, their four-limbed bodies moving with unnatural speed. We made it to the church and barricaded the door. 6 of us now. Somewhere in the chaos, we'd lost 2 more men. I hadn't even seen them die. "We can't stay here," Eddie gasped. "They'll dig up through the floor again." "The bell tower," I said. "We go up, get above them." We climbed the narrow stairs inside the tower, our footsteps echoing off stone walls. Behind us, we could hear the creatures breaking through the church door, hear them flooding into the nave below. Their breathing was everywhere now, wet and labored, the sound of lungs that didn't work right but kept going anyway. We emerged onto the bell platform, open to the freezing air, and looked out over the valley. What I saw will haunt me until I die. The entire mountainside was moving. Everywhere I looked, holes were opening, and from each one came more creatures. They moved in coordinated waves, crawling over the snow on their 4 twisted limbs, their heads hanging beneath their bodies, their mouths dripping corruption. Hundreds of them. Thousands, maybe. And in the distance, on the mountain's peak, I saw it. The ruins Crowley had mentioned. Not a building, but a circle of standing stones, massive monoliths arranged in a pattern that hurt to comprehend. They stood silhouetted against the moon, and even from miles away, I could feel something emanating from them. A wrongness that made my skin crawl and my heart race. "That's where they summoned them," Crowley said quietly. He was staring at the stones with an expression I couldn't read. "That's where the Germans performed their ritual." "What are you talking about?" Frank demanded. "What ritual?" Crowley turned to look at us, and in the moonlight, his face looked ancient. "The briefing I received before this mission. Intelligence knew the Germans had found something up here, some kind of archaeological site. Ancient ruins. They'd been conducting occult experiments, trying to summon infernal forces to win the war. Demons from the pit itself. And they lost control," Evan said. "They never had control," Crowley corrected. "You can't control forces like that. The moment they opened that gateway, these things came through, and they've been multiplying ever since, spreading through the tunnels, feeding on anything they find." Eddie laughed, high and brittle. "So what do we do? How do we fight demons?" Before Crowley could answer, the tower shook. The creatures were climbing the outside, pulling themselves up the stone walls with their misshapen limbs. I could hear their claws scraping, hear their breathing wet and wrong. "We don't fight them," Crowley said. He pulled out a map and compass, studying them by moonlight. "We run. We get to those ruins, and we find out exactly what the Germans did, because there has to be a way to stop this. There has to be." "And if there isn't?" I asked. Crowley looked at me, and I saw the truth in his eyes. He already knew what would have to happen if we couldn't stop them conventionally. He'd known before we ever came to this valley. The first creature crested the tower platform. Its body was a horror of decay and mutation, muscles exposed and twitching, black veins pulsing beneath skin that looked ready to split. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, teeth gleaming in the moonlight, and it released a shriek that sounded almost human. We opened fire. The night erupted in muzzle flashes and screaming, both human and otherwise. We fought on that narrow platform as more creatures climbed up, as they came at us from every direction. Their bodies absorbed bullets, kept moving even when they should have fallen, driven by something beyond mortal understanding. Evan went down first, dragged over the edge by 3 of them, their teeth sinking into his flesh. His scream cut off abruptly when he hit the ground far below. Frank was next, overwhelmed when his rifle jammed. I saw him disappear under a wave of rotting flesh, saw his blood spray across the stone. Then it was just 3 of us, me, Eddie, and Crowley. We fought back to back, firing until our rifles clicked empty, then using them as clubs, then our knives, then our bare hands against flesh that felt like it was already dead. "The rope!" Crowley shouted, pointing to the bell rope hanging in the center of the platform. "Swing to the roof." We didn't hesitate. Eddie went first, grabbing the rope and swinging out over the mass of creatures, landing on the church roof 20 feet away. I went next, my injured ribs screaming in protest, but I made it. Crowley was right behind us. He grabbed the rope, started to swing, and one of the creatures caught his leg. Its teeth sank in, and I heard him gasp in pain. "Go!" he shouted at us. "Get to the ruins. Find out how to stop them." "Sir, we can—" "That's an order, Private." The creature pulled him back onto the platform. More swarmed over him, their mouths opening wide, but even as they dragged him down, he was still shouting, "The ruins! Get to the ruins!" Then his voice cut off, replaced by the sound of tearing, and there was only the wet breathing of the creatures and the sound of feeding. Eddie and I ran across the rooftops, leaping gaps between buildings, the creatures flowing below us in a tide of corruption. We reached the edge of the village and jumped down into deep snow, then kept running, up into the mountains, toward those ancient stones that stood black against the stars. Behind us, the village was disappearing, sinking into the earth as the tunnel network beneath it collapsed completely. I looked back once and saw nothing but a crater where the hamlet had been, surrounded by thousands of creatures spreading out across the valley floor like a plague. We climbed through the night, driven by terror and desperation. The temperature dropped to lethal levels, but we couldn't stop. We could hear them behind us, their 4-limbed gait propelling them up the mountain, their breathing never stopping, never slowing. Above us, the stone circle waited. When we finally reached it, dawn was breaking over the mountains. The standing stones towered over us, each one 20 feet tall and carved with those same angular symbols that seemed to writhe in the early light. And in the center of the circle, we found the altar. It was made of black stone that seemed to absorb light, carved with channels that ran red with something that might have been old blood. Around it lay the remains of the German expedition, bodies in Wehrmacht uniforms, frozen and preserved by the mountain cold. Their faces were locked in expressions of absolute terror. But these weren't just dead men. They'd been torn apart, just like the villagers. Whatever they'd summoned, it had turned on them immediately. Eddie approached the altar carefully, his breath misting in the freezing air. "What did they do here?" I examined the bodies, looking for clues. One of them, an officer, still clutched a leather journal in his frozen hands. I pried it loose and opened it, squinting at the German text. My German was basic, learned in school, but I could make out enough. "They were trying to summon an army," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Demonic forces to fight for the Reich. They found this place, these ruins, and they thought they could control what came through." "Bobby," Eddie said quietly, "look at this." He was pointing at the altar. In the growing daylight, I could see that the channels carved into it weren't random. They formed a pattern, a design that connected all the standing stones in a specific way. A summoning circle, a gateway. And beneath the altar, barely visible in the shadows, was a hole. Not the kind the creatures had made, but something older, deliberately carved. A shaft leading down into absolute darkness. From that darkness came a sound that shook the earth. The same low, resonant tone we'd heard in the village, but louder now. So loud I felt it in my chest, felt it in my teeth and bones. The sound of something vast, something ancient, stirring in the deep places of the earth. The sound of hell itself, opened by human arrogance and desperation. And as the sun rose over the mountain, we understood the terrible truth. The Germans had tried to summon demons to save their dying Reich, but demons cannot be controlled. They'd opened a gateway to the infernal realm, and these creatures, these things of decay and corruption, had come through in a flood, and now they were multiplying, spreading. In weeks, maybe days, they would cover the continent. In months, the world. I looked at Eddie, and I saw my own horror reflected in his face. We were two soldiers, alone on a mountain, facing something that could end humanity itself. The journal fell from my hands into the snow. From the darkness below the altar, something began to climb toward the light. Something bigger than the others. Something that made the ground shake with every movement. And behind us, coming up the mountain path, we heard the breathing of hundreds more, drawn to this place like moths to flame. The dawn light revealed something that made my stomach drop. Behind the altar, carved into the mountainside itself, were more symbols. But these weren't the same as the ones the Germans had drawn. These were weathered, eroded by centuries, no, millennia, of exposure to the elements. "Eddie," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "look at this." He came to stand beside me, and I watched his face go pale as he traced the ancient carvings with his eyes. The symbols spiraled down into the rock face, disappearing into a massive fissure that split the mountain. "These aren't German," Eddie breathed. "These are... God, Bobby, how old are these?" Before I could answer, the ground beneath us trembled again. Not the violent shaking from before, but a rhythmic pulsing like a heartbeat deep in the earth. And from that fissure came the sound we'd been dreading, the wet breathing of hundreds, maybe thousands, of those things. "They're not coming from the altar," I realized with growing horror. "The altar isn't the source. It's just the door they opened. Those things have been down there all along." The creatures that had been circling us suddenly retreated, flowing back toward the fissure like water finding a drain. For a moment we were alone in the stone circle. Then we heard voices. German voices, shouting in panic, coming from somewhere inside the mountain. "There are survivors," Eddie said. "We need to..." "No," I interrupted. "We need to get out of here. Now!" But Eddie was already moving toward the fissure, his rifle raised. They might know something, might know how to stop this. I cursed under my breath and followed him. The fissure opened into a natural cave system, the walls marked with those same ancient symbols. Our flashlights cut through absolute darkness, revealing glimpses of horror. Bones scattered across the floor, some human, some not. The bones looked ancient, dried to the point of crumbling. The German voices were louder now, echoing through the tunnels. We followed them deeper, every instinct screaming at us to turn back. The tunnel opened into a massive cavern, and what we saw there drove all thought of retreat from my mind. It was a nest. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. Everything was covered in a black, pulsing substance that looked organic, alive. And embedded in that substance were bodies. Hundreds of bodies, German soldiers and civilians alike, their flesh merging with the corruption, transforming into something else. Some were still human enough to scream. In the center of the cavern, we found them. 3 German soldiers, filthy and terrified, firing their weapons at creatures that swarmed from every direction. The demons moved like a tide, their 4-limbed bodies climbing over each other in their hunger. "Americans!" one of the Germans shouted when he saw us. "Help us! For the love of God, help us!" Eddie and I opened fire, our rifles barking in the enclosed space. Creatures fell, black ichor spraying, but more kept coming. We fought our way to the Germans, forming a circle as the demons pressed in from all sides. "How many of you are left?" I shouted over the gunfire. "Just us," the German replied. His uniform marked him as a corporal. "Everyone else is dead or changed, becoming like them." "What is this place?" Eddie demanded. "What are these tunnels?" "We don't know," another German soldier cried. He was young, barely 18, his eyes wide with terror. "We only opened the gateway 2 weeks ago. But when we explored, We found these tunnels already here. Miles of them. And these things, they were already down here, sleeping. We woke them up. The third German, older and calmer despite the nightmare around us, spoke while reloading his rifle. The ruins above, the altar, they're ancient, older than history. We found texts in a monastery, instructions for the ritual. Colonel Reinhardt thought we were summoning demons to serve the Reich. He laughed bitterly. We just opened their prison. A creature lunged at us, its massive mouth gaping wide. I put 3 rounds into its exposed muscle and it fell thrashing, but my rifle clicked empty. We're out, I shouted. We need to move. There's no way out, the young German screamed. They're everywhere, in every tunnel, every... He never finished. A creature dropped from the ceiling, its claws sinking into his shoulders, its teeth finding his throat. His scream was cut short in a spray of red. Run, the corporal shouted. Follow me, there's another exit. We ran deeper into the cavern, the demons pursuing. The walls here were covered in that black substance, and I realized with sick certainty that it was spreading, growing, covering everything it touched, transforming the mountain from the inside out. We passed through chambers filled with horror, rooms where bodies hung from the ceiling like cocoons, places where the corruption had formed structures that looked almost intentional, almost architectural, and everywhere. And the creatures, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. They filled the tunnels like ants in a colony, crawling over each other, their bodies in various stages of decay and mutation. Some looked fresh, newly transformed. Others were ancient, their flesh dried and cracked but still moving, still hunting. This is what they'll do to the whole world, the older German said as we ran. Feed on everything, transform everything, until there's nothing left but this corruption, this hell. We emerged into another chamber, this one smaller, and the corporal stopped, pointing at a narrow tunnel on the far side. That leads up. Back to the surface, we can... The floor collapsed beneath him. He fell through into darkness below and we heard him screaming all the way down. The screaming went on for a long time, then stopped abruptly with a wet crunch. The older German stared at the hole, then at us. My name is Wilhelm, he said quietly. I need you to know what we did, what we learned. We need to keep moving, Eddie said. But Wilhelm shook his head. No time. Listen. The altar, it's not just a door. It's a seal, a prison seal. These things, they've been trapped here for thousands of years, since before civilization. Some ancient people, they knew what lived under this mountain, and they imprisoned it with that stone circle, with those symbols. Then the Germans broke the seal, I said. We shattered it, Wilhelm corrected. And now they're free, and they're multiplying. Every person they kill, every body they consume, it makes more of them. We've counted the rate of reproduction. At this pace, in 1 month they'll cover this entire mountain range. In 3 months, most of Europe. In 6 months... He didn't need to finish. Eddie grabbed him by the shoulders. Then we close it. We seal them back up. There has to be a way. Wilhelm pulled a folded paper from his jacket. A map, marked with symbols and coordinates. Colonel Reinhardt, before he died, he made contingency plans. He knew this could go wrong. He contacted the High Command, told them if the ritual failed, they would need extreme measures. He handed me the map. In the margin, written in hasty German script, was a single word and a set of coordinates. What does this mean? I asked. What are these coordinates? Wilhelm looked at me with eyes that had seen too much death. It means burning everything. The mountain, the tunnels, everything. Fire hot enough to cleanse the corruption at its root. Your military has been informed. They have the coordinates. But someone needs to verify the target, to confirm the location. Verify how? Eddie asked. Before Wilhelm could answer, the creatures found us. They poured into the chamber from every opening, a flood of rotting flesh and snapping teeth. Wilhelm raised his rifle and started firing, backing toward the tunnel. Go! Take the map! Get it to your command! Tell them to burn this mountain to ash! We can't leave you! I shouted. I'm already dead! Wilhelm fired again, dropping 2 creatures. We're all dead! Everyone who came into this mountain! But you can still save the world. Go! Eddie grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the tunnel. I looked back once and saw Wilhelm disappear under a wave of demons, still firing, still fighting. We climbed through darkness, our flashlights dying, our hands bleeding from sharp rocks. Behind us, the creatures pursued, their breathing filling the narrow space. We could feel them gaining, could hear their claws scraping stone inches from our feet. The tunnel opened suddenly, and we tumbled out into daylight. We were on the northern face of the mountain, maybe a mile from the stone circle. And below us, spread across the valley floor, was a nightmare. The entire valley was moving. Creatures covered every surface, thousands upon thousands of them, flowing like a living carpet of corruption. The villages we'd passed through days ago were gone, swallowed by the expanding nest. And at the edges, we could see the tunnels extending, spreading toward the next valley, the next village, the next city. "Oh God," Eddie whispered. Wilhelm was right. In months, this whole continent. I pulled out the map Wilhelm had given us, studied the coordinates. They marked this exact location. The mountain, the altar, the nest spreading beneath it. "We need to get these coordinates to command," I said. "But they're going to need verification. Someone who saw it firsthand. Someone who can confirm what needs to be done." Eddie looked at me, understanding dawning in his eyes. "One of us has to make it out, has to get far enough away to radio in, to authorize burning this entire mountain off the map," I finished. We heard sounds behind us. The creatures had found the exit. They were coming. Eddie grabbed my jacket, thrust his rifle into my hands. "You run faster than me, you always did. Take the map, take both our rifles, get to friendly lines." "Eddie, no. Bobby, listen to me." His eyes were fierce, determined. "Someone has to slow them down. Buy you time. And someone has to live to tell the world what happened here. To make sure this never happens again. I'm not leaving you. You're not leaving me. You're completing the mission." He smiled, and it was the same smile I'd seen 1,000 times back in Ohio, back before the war changed everything. "Tell my grandmother I died well. Tell her I made it count." Before I could argue, he pushed me hard, sending me stumbling down the slope. Then he turned and ran back toward the tunnel entrance, toward the horde of demons pouring from the mountain. "Eddie!" I screamed. He looked back once. "Run, Bobby, run, and don't stop." Then he opened fire. I ran. I ran down that mountain with tears freezing on my face, with his gunfire echoing behind me, with the screams of demons mixing with my best friend's voice, shouting defiance at hell itself. The gunfire lasted maybe 5 minutes, then it stopped. But I kept running. I ran through snow and ice, through forests and valleys, always moving away from that corrupted mountain. The map was clutched in my hand, the coordinates burned into my memory. 3 days later, I reached Allied lines. 3 days of running, hiding, moving through enemy territory with no food and no rest, driven by the memory of Eddie's sacrifice and the weight of the world on my shoulders. When I finally collapsed at a checkpoint, when I finally croaked out the words Code Black and Priority Command, they took me seriously. And when I transmitted those coordinates, when I verified the target and authorized the operation that Wilhelm had hinted at, I knew what it meant. Fire hot enough to cleanse corruption at its root. Fire hot enough to burn a mountain to ash. I just didn't know, not yet, that the fire they were planning was atomic. That Hiroshima and Nagasaki were just the test runs. That the real bomb, the one that would remain secret for 50 years, was meant for this mountain. The Allied checkpoint appeared through the trees like a mirage. I stumbled toward it, barely conscious, my legs moving on pure instinct. 3 days of running, hiding, moving through enemy territory with no food and almost no rest. The map was still clutched in my hand, the coordinates burned into my memory. "Halt! Identify yourself!" I looked up at the American soldiers pointing rifles at me and tried to speak, but my voice came out as a croak. I held up my dog tags with shaking hands. "Private Robert Ladd. Code Black scenario. Need immediate contact with command." The soldiers exchanged glances. One of them, a sergeant, stepped forward and caught me as my legs finally gave out. "Get a medic. Now!" He lowered me to the ground and I clutched his jacket. "The coordinates," I gasped. "Need to transmit. Code black. Authorization for... Easy, Private. We'll get you to... No time!" I grabbed the map from my pocket and thrust it at him. "Those coordinates, that mountain, it needs to be destroyed. All of it. Everything." The sergeant looked at the map, saw the German markings, the notations. His face went pale. "Jesus Christ. Get the radio operator here right now." They carried me to the command tent while a medic worked on my frostbitten hands and bleeding feet. But I wouldn't let them sedate me. Couldn't. Not until I'd completed the mission. Not until I'd made Eddie's sacrifice mean something. The radio operator set up his equipment, and within minutes, I was speaking directly to someone with enough authority to make decisions. I gave them the coordinates, told them everything. The creatures, the nest, the spreading corruption, the ancient prison that the Germans had shattered. "Private Lad," the voice on the other end said after a long pause, "what you're describing, the scale of this threat, it would require extreme measures." "I know what it requires, sir." My voice was steady now, cold. "I know exactly what needs to happen." Another pause. "Stand by." I sat there in that tent, wrapped in blankets, drinking hot coffee that tasted like heaven, while they made the decision that would change everything. Around me, soldiers went about their business, unaware that the fate of the world was being decided over a radio frequency. Finally, the voice returned. "Private Lad, authorization has been granted at the highest level. Operation Götterdämmerung is approved. The target will be eliminated within 72 hours. You'll be debriefed and transported to a secure location to await confirmation." "What is Operation Götterdämmerung?" I asked. "What exactly are you going to do?" "That's classified, Private. But I can tell you this. When it's done, that mountain and everything in it will cease to exist. You have my word." The transmission ended. They kept me in a medical facility for 2 days while doctors treated my injuries and psychiatrists asked gentle questions about what I'd seen. I told them everything. Every detail. Every horror. They wrote it all down with expressions that shifted between disbelief and growing dread. On the 3rd day, they brought him to see me. General Mark Ryan. 2 stars on his shoulders and eyes that had seen every kind of war hell could offer. He dismissed everyone else from the room and sat across from my bed with a folder marked with security classifications I'd never seen before. "Private Lad," he said quietly, "I've read your report. I've seen the reconnaissance photographs. I've consulted with experts in fields I didn't even know existed until last week." He paused. "What you encountered on that mountain, it's real. It's spreading. And if we don't act now, in 6 months there won't be a world left to save." "Operation Götterdämmerung," I said. "What is it?" Ryan studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth I could handle. Finally, he opened the folder. "The Manhattan Project. You've heard whispers, I'm sure. We've developed a weapon, a bomb that uses atomic fission to create an explosion of unprecedented power. We built 3 of them. 2 are designated for Japan, to force their surrender without a ground invasion." My blood went cold. "And the 3rd? "The 3rd was always meant for contingencies, for threats that conventional weapons couldn't touch." He pulled out photographs, aerial shots of the mountain, showing dark stains spreading across the snow like a disease. "In 72 hours, we're going to drop that bomb on your mountain. The explosion will be equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT. The heat will reach temperatures found at the surface of the sun. Everything within a 5-mile radius will be vaporized. The tunnels will collapse and seal. The corruption will be burned away at the molecular level." I stared at him, trying to comprehend the scale of what he was describing. "And my unit? Eddie, Crowley, all of them. They'll be gone," Ryan said gently. "Completely. There won't be anything left to bury, Private. I'm sorry." I closed my eyes, saw Eddie's face as he pushed me down that slope, heard his voice telling me to run. He'd known, somehow. Known that he was buying time not just for me to escape, but for something bigger. Something final. "When do we tell people?" I asked. "When does the world learn what really happened?" Ryan's expression hardened. "Never. The official story will be that the bomb was a failed test, or a natural disaster, or whatever cover we devise. But the truth, the real truth about what your unit faced, about what we're doing, that stays classified. Forever. Sir, these men died saving the world. They deserve to be remembered as heroes. And they will be, by the handful of people who know the truth. But the world can't know about this, Private. Think about it. If people learned that demons were real, that gateways to hell could be opened, that something like this could happen again. He shook his head. The panic alone would destroy civilization faster than those creatures ever could. I wanted to argue. Wanted to demand that Eddie and Crowley and all the others get the recognition they deserved. But deep down, I knew Ryan was right. Some truths were too dangerous to share. What happens to me? I asked. You'll be transferred to a secure facility, debriefed extensively. Eventually, when this is all over, you'll be given an honorable discharge and sent home. But you'll sign documents swearing you to secrecy. If you ever speak about what happened on that mountain, you'll spend the rest of your life in a military prison. He leaned forward. Can you live with that, Private? Can you carry this secret to your grave? I thought about Eddie's smile, about Crowley's steady voice, about young Evan Duke and his sharp eyes, about all of them lying dead in tunnels beneath a cursed mountain, waiting to be cremated by atomic fire. Yes, sir, I said. I can live with it. They flew me to a secure location in England to await confirmation of the strike. I spent 3 days in a guarded room, staring at walls, trying not to think about what was coming. On the 4th day, Ryan came to get me personally. It's time, he said. He drove me to an airfield where an observation plane waited. We took off at dawn, flying toward the coordinates I'd provided, staying high and far enough away to be safe from the blast. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Bomber is approaching target. ETA 5 minutes. I pressed my face to the window, looking down at the landscape below. Even from this height, I could see the corruption spreading across the valleys. Dark stains on pristine snow. The mountain itself looked different. Wrong somehow. As if the infection had changed its very shape. 4 minutes. I pulled out the small cross my mother had given me when I enlisted. Eddie had one too. Had carried it through every battle, just like me. I wondered if it was still with his body down in those tunnels, or if the creatures had... 3 minutes. Ryan's hand gripped my shoulder. Your unit didn't die for nothing, Private. Remember that. What we're about to do, it's because of them. Because of what they discovered, what they fought against, what they sacrificed to give us time. 2 minutes. The bomber appeared in the distance, a silver speck against the morning sky. I watched it approach the mountain, watched it reach the coordinates, watched the bomb bay doors open. 1 minute. All personnel, protective goggles on. I put on the goggles they'd given me, but I didn't look away. Couldn't look away. This was Eddie's funeral pyre, Crowley's grave marker, the only memorial they'd ever get. Bomb released, impact in 30 seconds. The bomb fell, a dark shape tumbling through the air. It seemed to take forever, that fall. Seemed to hang suspended between heaven and earth, carrying with it the power of stars and the judgment of God himself. Then it hit. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then, the mountain became the sun. The flash was so bright it overwhelmed the protective goggles, so intense I saw it through my closed eyelids. The plane shook despite being miles away, buffeted by forces that shouldn't exist in nature. When I could see again, when I pulled off the goggles with shaking hands, the mountain was gone. In its place rose a pillar of fire and smoke that climbed into the stratosphere, a mushroom cloud of unimaginable power. The shockwave spread outward in a visible ring, flattening forests, turning snow to steam, reshaping the landscape itself. Everything within 5 miles of the coordinates simply ceased to exist. The mountain, the stone circle, the altar, the tunnels, the nest, the creatures, all of it vaporized in an instant of atomic fury. And Eddie, and Crowley, and Frank, and Evan, and Moss, and Heidecker, all of them gone in a flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns. I pressed my hand against the window, and I prayed. Not for their souls. I knew where men like that went, but for myself. for the strength to carry this secret, for the ability to live with what I'd survived while they hadn't. My God, the pilot breathed. What have we done? What we had to, Ryan said quietly. What they died to make possible. The mushroom cloud continued to rise, a monument of fire and ash. The most powerful weapon ever created, used not on an enemy nation, but on a cursed mountain in the middle of nowhere. A strike that would be erased from history, covered up, denied. The real bomb, the one that mattered, the one that saved the world, and only a handful of people would ever know. They sent me home 3 months later, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, after Japan surrendered, after the war ended. I came back to Ohio with an honorable discharge, a chest full of medals for actions I could never discuss, and a secret that weighed more than any burden I'd carried during the war. I tried to live a normal life, got married, had children, worked at a factory for 40 years. But every night in my dreams, I was back on that mountain, back in those tunnels, watching Eddie push me down the slope, hearing Crowley's final order, seeing that flash of atomic light. My wife asked me once, early in our marriage, why I never talked about the war. I told her some things were better left buried. She never asked again. The nightmares never stopped. 50 years later, I still wake up hearing the wet breathing of those creatures, still feel the cold of that mountain, still see my friends' faces. The official story about the bomb, the third bomb that no one talks about, changed over the years. The Soviets eventually claimed credit for a test in their territory. The Germans called it an Allied war crime. But the truth got buried under layers of lies and misdirection, and the mountain became just another casualty of a war full of casualties. Only I know what really happened. Only I carry the truth. I'm 95 years old now, writing this in my attic in Ohio. My hands shake so badly I can barely hold the pen, but I've finally decided to write it all down. Not to publish. I signed documents swearing me to secrecy, and I'll honor that oath until my last breath. But someone should know. Someone should have a record, even if it stays hidden in this attic for another 50 years. General Ryan died 10 years ago. The other officers who knew the truth are all gone now. The scientists who built the bomb, the pilots who dropped it, most of them dead too, taking their pieces of the puzzle to their graves, which leaves only me, the last witness, the last man alive who saw what we were really fighting, who knows what it really took to win. I've written it all down now, every detail, every moment, every face of the men who died so the world could live. Eddie Kern, who pushed me down a mountain and sacrificed himself to buy me time, who hummed his grandmother's hymns in the face of hell itself. Lieutenant Clark Crowley, who led us into that valley knowing we might not come back, who died fighting to give us a chance to escape. Frank Fraser and Evan Duke, Moss and Heidecker, Wilhelm and his men, heroes whose names will never appear in history books, who saved humanity and received nothing but silence in return. I'm tired now. So tired. The doctors say my heart is giving out. Say I have maybe days left. Maybe hours. I think I'm ready. I set down my pen and close this journal. I'll hide it in the attic, in the old trunk where I keep my uniform and medals. Maybe someday, long after I'm gone, someone will find it. Maybe they'll read it and understand what really happened in 1945. What the third bomb was really for. Or maybe it'll stay hidden forever, and the truth will die with me after all. Either way, I'm at peace. I lie back in my chair and close my eyes. Outside my window, the sun is setting over Ohio, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Beautiful. Peaceful. Everything those men died to preserve. And in the silence of my attic, I hear it. Faint but unmistakable. Eddie's voice. Eddie's humming his grandmother's hymns. Not a memory this time. Not a dream. Something else. Something real. I'm coming, old friend, I whisper. Just waited for me long enough. The sun sets. The room grows dark. And somewhere far away, in a place beyond pain and secrets and atomic fire, my brothers in arms are waiting. Robert Ladd closes his eyes one final time, and the last witness to the most classified mission of World War II goes to sleep forever, hearing not the screams of demons or the roar of destruction, but the voices of heroes calling him home. The secret dies with him. The truth remains buried. And the world keeps turning, never knowing how close it came to ending on a cursed mountain in 1945.